Good morning. At last there's some action in the federal election campaign in which we must, like it or lump it, force ourselves to be interested. And off the top this morning, we're going to tell you what's going to happen or not going to happen to the indomitable Simma Holt, because she was, believe it or not, renominated last night, as Brian tells you.
For the Liberals, it was their second-to-last nominating meeting for next month's federal election. Vancouver Kingsway riding, and a comeback bid by this lady, Simma Holt, the former Sun columnist who 7 months ago was this riding's MP. But there was a challenger, a young upstart 28-year-old lawyer, Victor Elias, vying with Simma for the nomination. And although there were about 150 supporters at the meeting, only a handful of them had voting rights. 35 of them were actually signed up by the Liberals. And then the speeches to choose a candidate.
I am not a rubber stamp, but I think I'm a very good Liberal. I think I'm a true Liberal. And to those who heard some things about me being an independent Liberal, I can tell you ever since I got to Parliament, I've been asked to be independent. I would never be anything but work on a team. But I am home, and this, I feel, are my people. These, I feel, are my people. On the streets yesterday and the day before, when I was trying to decide what I should do with my life, people came up to me, and I actually had them weep, saying, "You are back, you are back," and I feel I am back, I'm at home.
Then it was the young lawyer's turn, Victor Elias, and his attack on the Tories and Crosby's budget.
Had that budget been allowed to pass, allowed to slip into law by an opposition afraid of a winter election, I, for one, would have felt ashamed. Ashamed that the fear of risking another campaign had kept us from doing the right and the decent thing. Because the right and decent thing was to say no to Crosby's sledgehammer attacks on our delicate economic fabric.
Then the voting and all the suspense. But to be a voter, you had to be signed up 15 days in advance, and that left only 35 people on the list. So while the three scrutineers double and triple checked their counting of the 35 ballots, Senator Ray Perot was in the other room predicting a Liberal majority of 147 seats.
Fellow Liberals, it would be unthinkable not to have a strong representation of Liberals in that new majority government.
The counting completed, the winner was not a surprise.
Simma Holt has received the majority of ballots cast and is hereby declared elected.
With Iona Campagnola gone, you can't count out Simma, at least to supply some fire and some tears to the campaign. But she wasn't the only one who was in tears over this campaign. Dalton Camp, in his column, which was killed and later appeared in another newspaper in Toronto, calls this a grotesque election campaign. That one of the most articulate and intelligent politicians in Canada, P.E. Trudeau, would run what is presumably his last campaign as though he were a frightened Richard Nixon. Clark's going to be in town next week. He'll face the media. Crosby's going to be in town. He'll face the media. Pierre's going to be in town. No word of him whatsoever facing the media. Mr. Phillips might be able to give us some light on that, because this morning we're going to look at one of the key Liberal, in fact, it is the only Liberal seat west of Winnipeg, Vancouver Centre. On a simple profile, which you all know, it covers Kitsilano, downtown, bits and pieces here and there. Got 60-odd thousand voters. 10% of the population are transient, or turnover annually, I should say. The Liberals have held it since '63, and in the last election, Art Phillips won by a scant 95 votes on the recount. Art Phillips running again for the Liberals. His principal, well, who knows? Yes, his principal contender, Pat Carney. The Pat Carney, one of the bright people, we're told, of the Tory inside clique, former reporter, journalist, economist. But the dark horse in the middle, Ron Johnson, who came within a couple of thousand votes of total victory last time round, has been plugging away for the N.D.P. and established himself very solidly in Vancouver Centre. So today we're going to look at the issues. What the local issues are, who cares? This is a national election being run on a negative basis. I think at the moment we'll explore it with these three erudite and literate campaigners after the break. This is a strange election, and I do subscribe to some of Dalton Camp's views, as in this morning's province, that it's a weird campaign being run by the Liberals. It's a reversal of last time round. The Tories are up front, and so are the N.D.P, of course, talking and campaigning, and the Liberals seem to be hiding their principal light, who had already fled the scene under some particular bushel. Mr. Phillips, you are the only Liberal elected west of Winnipeg. The only
Last time, Jack. We're going to change that this time.
The incumbent, the only one elected. How can you people have the gall, as you're doing now, to say that you're going to sweep the country?
Well, I don't think we're going to sweep all parts of the country. I think we're going to do better in the West, but not sweep the West. And I think clearly there's a big turnaround taking place in Ontario. So if the polls continue to show as they do, we'll have a Liberal government the next time around. And I'm hoping that there'll be some more company from the West, because I think that's a good thing for the country and for the West.
Well, before I turn to your opponents, could you please give me one solitary reason why why you should do any better? I mean, have you a new policy, a new leader, an old leader, the second coming? Give me a reason why anyone should vote Liberal.
Well, I think last time the vote against the Liberals was entirely negative. The people didn't know who they were voting for when they voted for Joe Clark. They've now had 7 months of Joe Clark, and for the most part, they found that he just can't govern. He just isn't capable of doing it.
Oh, what has he done that's turned everybody, makes them love once again the sometime charismatic Trudeau?
I don't want to keep on negative things, but you're asking me.
Yeah.
He promised lower interest rates, he delivered higher interest rates. He promised lower taxes, he delivered higher taxes.
Just stop there.
Okay.
Promised lower interest rates and delivered higher ones.
Right?
You're a financial expert, aren't you?
Yes.
Could you promise lower interest rates?
I didn't.
Could you?
No. Oh, I could at this point. I did not in the last campaign. He did.
He did.
He did. He lost his credibility because he did. I didn't.
He promised lower taxes, they gave you higher taxes.
Yes, and I, in my literature, argued against that. I said I thought that was an unsound thing to promise at that time, and it was.
Okay, next question. There are no issues in Vancouver Centre on which the election rests as far as you're concerned. No issues.
Well, there are some local BC issues that I think are emerging. For instance, this Trident aircraft issue is not Vancouver Centre specifically, but it's certainly a BC issue that's emerging. I presume you've been covering that, and that's...
Not only covered it, broke the major stories on it, too.
Good.
I hope you recognize
Way
that
ahead, as usual.
Mr. Phillips. But anyway, you're hoping to be elected because people hate Clark and because they don't hate the walkaway Trudeau quite as much.
No, let me say this. I'm hoping that we're re-elected because I think that the Liberal government has proven that it can govern in difficult times. I think we're in a particularly difficult time internationally, and it's a time when a leader of Mr. Trudeau's stature is absolutely vital. We're in very scary, very difficult international times.
He's going to throw our 17,000 soldiers into action.
Put it this way, Trudeau is the most highly respected Canadian internationally, and that's, I think, beyond question. I think even you and even Dalton Camp would admit that.
Miss Carney, you are the Tory standard bearer. It is said of you that had you not kind of had a change of mind in the middle, you'd have walked all over Art last time round.
You think so?
You're in this time full-time.
Right.
Have been since then.
That's correct.
What do you say to Mr. Phillips?
Well, I get so exasperated by some of the statements the Liberals are making. For instance, in fact, they don't have a leader. They don't have any set of policies. They have a very bland statement of 5 points, which some of the Eastern commentators say is an insult to democracy. They're going to improve the economy. They're going to create jobs, none of which they did in power. They don't have a government. They no longer have the ability to govern. They've lost a lot of their good people here in BC. Iona Campanello is one of them. And some of the statements are just not correct. We did not promise to reduce interest rates in 6 months. We promised that by reducing our budget deficit and freeing up the money we pay on interest rates, we could restore health to the economy and lower interest rates. And interest rates over the first term, a 4-year term of government, would come down. Similarly, our budget does cut taxes. We didn't bring in a personal income tax cut as we originally thought we could, because there simply isn't any money. I think people have to realize, and I think they do realize, that to spend any more money means that we have to borrow it. And since we're already paying 16 to 20 cents of every dollar we spend on our interest, we don't want to increase our debt. In our budget, through the mortgage deductibility and through the energy tax credit, which would protect lower and middle income people from rising energy costs, we did in effect reduce personal taxes. And of course we slapped a surcharge on business. So the idea that the Tories did not keep their promises is rather ridiculous when you think that, in the 47 days of Parliament, we only had 16 days to introduce our programs. The rest of the 47 days was dealing with, as John Crosby says, the debris left over from the last government. So our whole position...
You don't accept any guilt as to broken promises by the Clark government?
No, and I find that most people that I talk to, on the doorstep, find it unrealistic to think that we could resolve the problems of 11 years of Liberal mismanagement in 6 months. Our budget is only one of many measures that we have brought in to restore health. And as John Crosby says, get this financial problem behind us and, enter the 80s in a healthy state.
Can you account for this incredible, and I find it myself, I'll be quite honest about it, incredible liberal confidence that the man who was going to walk away and look after his family is back temporarily, but he's still better, more attractive, more charismatic, brighter, more intelligent and more acceptable than the man whom Dalton Camp called the wimp, Joe Clark?
Well, I don't get any of that. I mean, I don't find people are rushing back to support Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And the idea that a person of Flora MacDonald's stature in the world and Prime Minister Clark's performance at the Tokyo summit is degraded by the Liberals is, people will just have to make up their own minds on it.
Can you win this Vancouver Centre?
Yes, we can. The support's there, and we're running a good campaign and a very steady pace.
There's a man in the middle who I seem to have been interviewing for 1,000 years, since he was in his short pants. He's only 28 now. And his name is Ron Johnson. And he's one of these dedicated N.D.Pers who trudges along quietly and may well win. His turn after the break. Oh, I must remember, I forgot to ask Art, we'll ask him later why Trudeau has got band-aids across his lips this time as far as the media is concerned. Ron Johnson, N.D.P, you came within 2,000 votes of winning. You first ran in your very early 20s, you're now 28. You have a highly efficient door-knocking campaign, and you're going to slip through because of that and not because of any charisma from Broadbent. Am I correct?
Oh, well, I don't agree with that. Certainly we put the best organization into the riding last time, I think, and it's even better this time. And we're very optimistic that our organization will have a major impact on the results.
Excoriate these two phonies first and then come down to the positive side.
Well, I think in looking at the other two campaigns, we have two good candidates. If we want to carry on with the kind of representation, the kind of government we've had in the past. But what I have to do as a candidate, and certainly what our party is doing, what Ed Broadbent is doing, is we have to point out that on most of the major issues affecting the country, these two basically take the same position. If you look at the question of interest rates, it was the Liberals that established the high policy of interest rates. 7 increases in the last 2 years of their administration. Now we've had 4 from the Conservatives. If you look at the question of energy prices, moving Canada's prices to the cartel world prices, was the Liberals that first adopted that policy. Now the Tories are tagging along with it. If you look at Medicare and the whole threat to the health system in this country, was the Liberals in 1977 that changed the financing formula. The Tories voted with it. I could go on and on.
But now go on instead and unmask the true socialist that lies behind this smooth liberal type Broadbent. What would you really do? What would you do about the world price of oil? What would you do about money which we must have from world sources to keep our industry going?
Well, we have never said that the price of oil doesn't have to rise, and there's no doubt that it will. But the question is, when the price of oil rises, how much does it rise, and what do you do with the price increase, with the money that is generated? Now, in the Conservative budget, they propose to give $33 billion to the multinationals. We say that that is completely unjustifiable. The big five multinationals in Canada have had their tax rate decreasing from 70, just as one example, from 74 to 78. Under the Liberals, from 34% to 21%. Shell Canada paid no income tax at all in 78, in spite of the fact they had $155 million profit, courtesy of the Liberal government of the day. So we say that there is no need for that $33 billion to be taken out of the pockets of Canadian consumers and the inflationary effect that it has. We say instead, if the price has to rise, then it has to reflect the increased cost of production in Canada, replacement costs. We have to make Canada self-sufficient, and the cost is going to go up to do that. But this kind of giveaway is just totally unjustified.
Yeah, but there's nothing socialist about that. You're merely talking about a different tax shuffle. That's all.
Well,
you tax the windfall profits. How are you going to get the oil companies to look for oil unless you let these big multinationals rip you off a bit? Maybe they won't look.
Well, they've ripped us off for years, and if they don't want to look, that's just fine, because we have an organization in Canada that will look. It's called Petro-Canada.
Let me hear your socialist. I don't know if Broadbent's coming on here or not, but I want to know what he's going to do to bring socialism to Canada. You tell me.
To bring socialism. Well, one of the first things we've said is that we have to have a plan for our economy. We have to figure out a way to create jobs in this country and to put the Canadian economy on a sound footing. We've been drifting along
What's the plan?
Well, the plan is very simple. It's followed in Western Europe, it's followed in Japan. It's to sit down with industry across the table and to negotiate with them agreements for what areas of the economy we're going to have investment and development in. It's quite simple, really. That's the first major step.
And of course, if I were a Tory or a Liberal, I'd say, and it's also when you're sitting down, and it's to give the unions everything they want, like Barrett did when he was in power here.
Well, if you were a Liberal Tory, you might say that, but certainly we're in favor of increasing the role that workers play in this whole process.
You're so modest and moderate, I hardly recognize the N.D.P.
Well, you know, it's funny, I always have to laugh. People keep saying that as we flesh out our policies, as we become more and more detailed, that somehow that makes us more moderate. I don't think there's any change there at all. What we're doing is we're giving you some details, some specifics about how we're going to make the Canadian economy work for Canadians.
Dear viewers, you've met Carney. In fact, we're an old family compact. We've done this interview so often over so many elections that it's really quite comical. Carney, Phillips, and Johnson. Now, I want them to have at each other because I'm not capable of stirring them up. They're so friendly. Maybe on Trudeau I can get him going a little bit, but I want you in soon. And I want short, I don't want partisan bleats. I want short, sharp, succinct questions to these candidates in a key riding in the election. What's the date of the election?
February the 18th.
Is it a Monday?
Yep. Yes, it is.
Do we have to go?
Definitely.
No, you should.
After the break. I know my own nose is out of joint. Art Phillips, that is. Oh, there's another Phillips running, Jack Phillips.
Yes.
But Jack Phillips is not a ringer. Jack Phillips is a communist whom I've known for many years, who was actually nominated before Art, and he's running in Vancouver Centre. And he's a tough little guy. And you don't feel that it's a setup or anything.
Oh, no, no. Jack Phillips has been long an active person in the Communist Party. It's just a coincidence that our names are the same.
You might steal that couple of hundred votes that'll get you back in, though, Pat.
Well, it might steal a couple of hundred votes from Art Phillips. That'll get me back in.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean.
Now, that's the case.
My nose is out of joint. It's quite obvious up to now. According to what I read in the Eastern media and hear from all the Eastern wiseacres, including your friend Fotheringham, your best supporter, he just called you flip-flop, didn't he?
All sorts of things.
That Pierre is being led around with blinders on his eyes and a band-aid on his mouth. It's pathetic, isn't it?
Well, I think that...
Is it pathetic?
Anyone that knows Pierre Trudeau knows that nobody leads him around. And if he adopts a deliberate strategy to have a low profile, that's his strategy, not anybody else's.
Oh, come off it.
Come on now, you know Trudeau. You've had Trudeau sitting here, you know no one can push him around.
Toughest guy in the world, unless, of course, he's so power-hungry now that he wants to get back in at any cost.
Maybe he just doesn't care. I mean, he's given all indications that it was not his idea to have this election, that he was more or less drafted after a long delay into going back into the leadership, and his two main replacements, John Turner and Don MacDonald, of course, are no longer runners, so maybe he just doesn't give a damn.
Well, according to the inside story, he played a part in telling MacDonald that he was going to stay, didn't he?
I don't know. I've seen a lot of speculation various ways on that, but I think the fact is he did respond to a draft. A lot of people felt that he would certainly be, the great majority felt that he would be the best man to lead the party.
You didn't.
And I think that that is turning out to be true, because I think the real sleeper in this election campaign is the international situation.
But you didn't feel he was the right man to lead the party, did you?
I gave my opinion in the caucus meeting, and I gave both shades of the opinion. I pointed out that Mr. Trudeau had a lot of fans in the West, and he had also a lot of people that were opposed to him in the West. Now, what I've found in the last couple of weeks is not only has the hostility that was there before diminished considerably, but there's a lot of people feeling now that this is a hell of a good time to have a guy like him around.
You wanted a leadership convention.
Well, there was a leadership convention scheduled.
Arthur, answer my question.
Oh, you mean during the election campaign?
You personally didn't want Trudeau to run again as leader?
I thought it would have been a heck of an idea to have a leadership convention during the election campaign, and it turned out to be technically more or less impossible.
Well, the Conservatives are in a lucky position because we don't have to run on the basis of one man with blindfolds and band-aids. We have our Prime Minister, we have Flora MacDonald, we have John Crosbie, we have David Crombie, we have all our John Fraser, we have our senior BC ministers, and we have a very effective team who can govern the country right now, and that's far more important in a time of international strife than a non-existent myth of an alternative.
Well, the Tories aren't looking for blindfolds and band-aids because they had them last time, you know, and I think that's the point that we have to remember. When you're running a party leader that's not prepared to be out front and tell you where he stands on the issues, then, you know, you're buying a pig in a poke if you elect that person. And certainly that was what we got last time, and that's what we'll get with Trudeau if he gets back in. People voted him out last May for very good reason. And it seems to me, and certainly the door knocking, the response I've been getting, is that people have not forgotten that. They know they may not have the vigor and the resentment that was there last May, but they haven't forgotten that the Trudeau administration was a disaster, and they're not going to forget.
If the N.D.P. is so interested in discussing policy and alternatives, why aren't they more forthcoming with their own plans? On some of your energy issues,
I think we've been the most specific of any party.
You have a lot of motherhood statements and a lot of programs which actually support our conservative programs.
Well, there are many programs that we all agree on, but our policy is I think, more specific than the kind of energy fund that the budget talks about that has no details at all. That's
a good point, but I mean, back to Liberals.
Yep.
I mean, you seem to be, I'm not trying to be unkind, Arthur, such bleeding hypocrites. You know perfectly well that the price of gas and oil must go up.
Jack, can I comment on that?
Yeah.
Because Trudeau and I and other members of the Liberal Party have said exactly that the price has to go up.
Why attack the Crosbie budget?
We attacked the Crosbie budget not on the price of oil and gas going up, but on the specifics of the gasoline tax. We felt the 18-cent gasoline tax was a bad idea, and we would not introduce it. If we bring in a budget for 1980-81, it will not have the 18-cent gasoline tax in it. We thought that was a bad tax, and unlike what Pat Carney was just saying a minute ago, their own budget shows that their net tax increase in this coming year was $2,605 million on page 26 of their budget. They were planning to increase taxes tremendously, and the main tax increase was the gasoline tax. We would not bring that in, but the price of oil should go up.
Well, I'm just back from Britain, where I paid $3 Canadian a gallon, and I come back here and I'm still only paying $1 Canadian a gallon. Obviously, we're living in a fool's paradise here.
Now,
why do you say that,
tax,
though? Because, you know,
I think I can respond to that. The gasoline tax is brought in for two reasons, three reasons, but two that we'll deal with here. One is to increase revenues. It's one way to add to our revenue base and to decrease our deficit. The other one is to conserve our use of gasoline. We have at the moment some of the cheapest transportation fuel in the world, and we are the most wasteful energy users. And the trends in the U.S. have shown that if you increase the price of gasoline, you do conserve your consumption. And we have got to face up to that. That's one way that we propose to do it. We already pay a 7% gas tax. And when John Crosby is on your show tomorrow, I'm sure that you will go into this matter with them, but it was to conserve energy and to increase revenues.
But you know, it is so unjustifiable when the oil companies are making the profits they do to give $33 billion with no strings attached. You know, if it was what Pat is talking about, surely the government would sit down and would talk with the oil companies about exactly what it is that that they propose to do with that
no, but I'm with them on
increase.
That. No. I mean, there must be a tax back, surely.
It's a giveaway to the.
There must be a redirection
companies.
of the additional monies taxed from the Canadian people through gasoline taxes. Some into revenue, some into research, but not into the pockets of the oil companies.
That's right.
That's right.
And we all agree.
For that.
Yep.
No, I'd like to. I have to make a point on that. If we are to achieve our goal is to be self-sufficient in energy, including oil, by the year 1990, so that we're protected from the results of the international strife that we face. One of the ways to do that is to develop our own reserves. Now, the realities are that we are going to need the oil companies and their expertise and their permits. They have the permits on most of this land, the oil-bearing land, and we need their help to explore and develop the
they've
sources
been
of
making
crude.
fantastic
No,
profits as it is,
like to point that.
and if they're not prepared to do the exploration in this country with the profits they're making, then as Ed Broadbent said, to hell with Shell. We'll have Petro-Canada do it because, you know, there is no excuse. We've had our resources, the oil, 90% of our petroleum resources are foreign-owned, and there's no need to give away more.
Crosby has stated repeatedly that the extra revenues that the oil companies get in the price increases will be directed into new exploration and development. And there is talks.
Okay, Art Phillips now. Art, go ahead. Your point on this.
Jack, I don't think we need to be blackmailed by the oil companies just because they might have permits. We have control over our own oil industry, and we should strengthen that control. We should strengthen it by enlarging the role of Petrocan greatly.
That's exactly
this is what the Liberals want to do. The Tories have been in 25 different directions on Petrocan. In fact, on an open line radio program yesterday, Pat described it as badly managed, debt-ridden company, and so on. Petrocan is a fine, successful, well-managed, good company, and it should be retained by the government, expanded, strengthened. We can't leave our energy future in the hands of the foreign-owned oil companies just because they might have some permits. We should not do that.
It's just a pity that in your 11.5 years in power you didn't come up with a good energy policy which was so visible a need for so long.
Let me answer that, Jack. I think they did a very good job. I wasn't part of that government. Petrocan was formed in 1974 as a response to the energy crisis and the Arab oil crisis. The incentives to oil companies were introduced at that time, and it did reduce their tax rates at that time, and that worked. They found a lot of oil. They particularly found a hell of a lot of gas. Now, at this point, I think that those incentives are not needed, and we should be reducing those incentives and increasing the tax take that the federal government gets from the oil
Gentlemen and ladies, we're going to lose place on this altogether, but if I can sum up, the N.D.P. position in oil is really control all profits from the oil companies, develop Petrocan as the leader all the way through. Isn't that correct?
That's quite correct.
You'd squeeze them even if it meant chasing some of them out of the country.
Well, they're not going to leave. They never have. There's no evidence in any country in the world that they've left. They don't leave. That's
he takes a liberal position that we formed Petrocan. We're very reasonable people. We will encourage development and take away the permits if we have to.
We will I don't think the incentives are needed to the same extent for the private industry that were, and I think we must expand petrochem.
And of course you wouldn't even put up the price of gas and nickel, would you?
Oh, I think it would it's going to go up. We're not arguing.
And your position is that the economy is in good hands with Crosby's budget, which encourages the oil companies but gives money to general revenue.
And also strengthens petrochem.
Now I promise to go to telephone calls. I insist, because I'm only getting bogged down in details with people who know too much detail for me. After the break. The riding is Vancouver Centre. It's very important because it's the only Liberal seat west of Winnipeg. Pat Carney, the Tory, Art Phillips, the incumbent Lib, Ron Johnson, the N.D.P. The rules of the game: short, sharp, succinct. Questions: short, sharp, succinct answers. You look at that camera when answering. If you two gentlemen will peer at that tiny little lens there, the listeners will believe they're talking to you. Go ahead, please.
Question for Art Carney and the Liberals' so-called all-new energy policy, please.
Did you say Art Carney?
Not here.
No, Art Carney's in Hollywood.
Sorry.
Maybe
Art Phillips
maybe you meant Jackie Gleason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Art Phillips.
Art Phillips, go ahead.
I'm going to cut into the Carney vote now, you see.
Called all-new energy policy.
Yes, sir.
What is the difference between Dave Broadbent, Pierre Barrett, and Ed Trudeau? And whoever wrote the script for that scenario, I take it was probably Herb Gray, should be writing scripts for skinflicks such as Deep Throat. That's what.
Thank you, sir. He's almost a humorist, but he didn't quite make it.
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes, sir.
This morning's Calgary Herald, and frankly I'm confused by it. It says, if Trudeau did to Maggie what he did to the rest of the country, she'd still be with him. Just what do they mean?
I can't answer your question, sir.
Webster, what kind of a show do you run on this?
I'm beginning
But
to
that's a hell of a lively question.
That's a good, lively
Yes.
question. Matter of fact, we ran a picture of Margaret on the new news the other day, and I had to cover my eyes and avert my gaze. That Jim Hart really runs a disgusting show at noon. Where from?
Good morning from sunny Salmon Arm.
Oh, not you again. Okay, ask your question.
To Ron Johnson, as many voters do, I voted N.D.P. provincially and PC federally. We were disenchanted when you sided with the the Liberals to overthrow the Clark government, and we wonder why.
Well, first of all, let me just say that we didn't side with the Liberals. They sided with us. It was our motion. We made it very clear from the beginning of this Parliament that we were going to support good legislation and vote against bad legislation. We saw the budget. We decided that it was not in the best interest of Canadians, and we decided that we would move a motion to defeat the budget. Now, the Liberals then went through a whole array of different doublethink and discussion and caucusing, of course, as parties do, and finally decided that they would vote with us to bring the government down.
The Liberals got drunk with power.
Their own power, it could be, but in any event, let me just say about the defeat of the government that we recognize that it was a minority parliament situation, and as I've said before, I'll accuse the Tories of many things, but I'm not going to accuse them of not being able to count, and they knew what the vote was.
The fact remains is that you'd be quite happy to form a kind of rump group for a Liberal minority, wouldn't you?
If I'm a member of Parliament, that's not a possibility.
Not a possibility from your point of view. Anything to say to that? I don't think so. Do you have?
No.
I mean, you were there, though, mind you, weren't
Yes,
you?
I was.
At this, when the N.D.P. refused to pay, when the N.D.P., when your man Chrétien went to the N.D.P. and suggested a few of you stayed away.
That's a story I've heard. I didn't talk to Jean Chrétien didn't say that to me. But I was there, and we voted against the legislation because we thought it was bad legislation, and we thought it was one of a series of pieces of bad legislation.
Are you telling me, Art Phillips, that when you went in there, you didn't know you were going to knock down the government?
As a matter of fact, we realized it about 3 or 4 hours before the vote. But I had felt all along that the Creditistes would support the government, and that the government wouldn't be so stupid as to leave the Flora MacDonald in Paris and some other guy off in Fiji. I mean, honestly, they could have easily had their troops there, but I was surprised.
The Conservatives were governing. That's what they were doing on the day that the government went down. And I just have to make the point, when the opposition says it's a bad budget, the budget wasn't even debated. Most Canadians don't even know what was in the budget. They were denied the opportunity to make up their own minds. That they were just wiped out and the government defeated on a budget that people are now starting to realize at least presents concrete, realistic proposals, a concrete plan, where the other parties just offer the same old blah blahs.
Port Hardy, go ahead, please.
Yes, for Mr. Phillips.
Yes?
Mr. Phillips.
Yes, sir.
I feel that I'm a very staunch Liberal supporter, for one. For two, I'm very much with you in as much as the Clark government have promised lower taxes and lower interest rates and given us higher taxes and higher interest rates. And the N.D.P party don't even have a plan ready. But the Liberals, the one lacking that they have on the West is proper representation. I feel you, Mr. Lee, Iona Campanola, people like David Anderson in Victoria should be on the Liberal federal team. And we should have better representation from...
What's your question?
The question is, will the Liberal Party look into having maybe provincial Liberals run federally?
Silly question. Doesn't make any sense.
Sir, I think that...
where are the provincial Liberals? There are none.
No, I think the answer is to put forward good candidates again, as we did last time. And I think this time around, people like Gordon Gibson, Art Lee, and a new candidate, Peter Pierce, who is very likely to be nominated in Vancouver Quadra, an outstanding candidate, an economist, expert in forestry and mining. We have a number of very good new candidates around the province, and we'll be putting them forward. I think we're going to improve our representation.
Iona Campagnola's not running.
True.
Paul Manning's not running. Len Marchand's not running. Ray Perot can't run.
But you see, Jack, you can't have it both ways. You can't criticize the Liberals for being the same old team and then also criticize them for having a new team. The fact is we have a new team.
As of this moment, you are the team west of Winnipeg.
Not for long.
True.
Not for long?
No.
Any bets on this, by the way? Can we make any bets?
Off air.
Sure.
Off air. Okay. Go ahead, please.
There's a bit of a smokescreen here that I'd like to poke through here. All this talk about gas being expensive and milk's more expensive. I'm worried about food going up. But you're a smokescreen on these oil companies, you know, Jack. They tell in the United States, they say, oh, it's money we made in foreign. Here, the story they tell, money we make is we need for exploration. Union Oil is going to spend $100 million and go into their coal deposit. Standard Oil owns Safeway, we all know that.
No.
And I think that all these deferred taxes, now we all know Eric Cairns, don't we? He says you can pick up an easy 1 year, $22 billion just by having this done. The multinationals have deferred their taxes, and they've had interest-free loans to hundreds of millions of dollars.
Is that not true? $971 million in deferred taxes and...
No, sorry, I lost track of the question because I was thinking about the fact that all these figures are being bandied about. And I'll add one. It's going to take us about $130 billion of investment to become self-sufficient in this country.
You're taking it out on the working people. This is what annoys us.
And we need all the expertise and all the help that we can get to do that. Now, I've worked in the oil patch in Calgary for years. And, you know, in the oil companies that we bandy about, nobody likes the oil companies. That's truism. But the fact is there's a lot of talent that we need in those oil companies, and we have to work together on some goal plan to achieve our goals, and that's why John Crosby said that the oil company revenues would be redirected to exploration.
And it's time when countries all over the world, you know, I can never believe how the oil companies and Pat now is treating Canada like the last banana republic, you know, that somehow we have to rely on the multinationals and give them whatever they want, when in fact all around the world that's not being the case.
We have to rely on each other.
And the caller's making a very good point, I think.
Nothing to say on that. Go ahead, please.
Yes, the handicapped right now are not included in the Human Rights Act except under the section dealing with employment. Joe Clark broke his promise to include them under the Human Rights Act, and the Liberals never did allow the handicapped any rights. I'd like to ask Ron Johnson how the N.D.P stand on this issue.
I have to point that out.
Well, there's never been any hesitation on our part. It is policy that handicapped should be included in the Human Rights Code.
Which Human Rights Code are we talking about?
Of course, in this, we're talking about federal human rights code here, but it's provincial as well.
Handicapped people, generally speaking, come under provincial legislation for disability pensions, education, and whatnot. So it's really a provincial matter. Surely the handicapped are covered, generally speaking, under the federal human rights code.
I don't know.
No, they aren't.
I don't know that particular.
They're only covered under employment.
They are not specifically covered in the same way as discrimination against people on account of sex, color, religion, etc. is spelled out. On account of physical disability is not spelled out in that section of the code. I think there's no question that we have to work a lot harder at making everything accessible to the handicap. I know.
Moved, seconded, and carried unanimously that the Federal Human Rights Code should include an anti-discrimination clause against the handicap. Right?
Right, someone's got to do it.
But
though.
you say that Joe broke a promise on it. You make a note on it, will you? In case he's Prime Minister.
I'm surprised by that. The good Lord was given 7 days to create this world, and apparently the Joe Clark administration was given 6 months to implement every promise that we made and to reshape the economy. There are measures in our budget that aid the handicapped, and there are other measures being planned to aid the handicapped.
And the handicapped, who are generally the lowest income groups, are also hit the hardest by your budget.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
The Canadian government has let the armed forces run down till they are practically non-existent. I think we're going to be in a war very shortly, and I'd like to know what the candidates have to say about military defense and equipment.
Hold on, please. I interviewed a gentleman the other day who's a bit of an expert on this, and it became a laughable situation. 17,000 soldiers we have, of which 6 in Canada, put them in one half of Empire Stadium. 6,000 are combat troops. The rest are 9 to 5 support and other troops. We have 147 or 137 generals. We have outdated equipment. The force has come down from 34,000 men in Trudeau's day at the time of the October Revolution to 17,000 now. We're talking about soldiers because they got no inflation index and all the extra money went to pay increased wages and 17,000 soldiers disappeared. Do we need an army at all? Isn't the RCMP enough?
No.
Jack, I think we need an armed service, and I think that we have to review the situation in view of the international events that are coming up now. And I want to say that the questioner asked my party's point of view, the Liberal Party's point of view on this matter, and I would say this, that we do not agree with the New Democrats that we should pull out of NATO and NORAD. We think we should stay in NATO and NORAD, that these are joint defense measures, that, and they're defensive, and they help us, and they're a way of getting the kind of defense and protection that we need cooperatively with other nations. They're very important for us to
But you will
stay in.
agree that it was under Trudeau's leadership, a lack of interest in the armed forces, that they have been virtually destroyed.
No, I wouldn't agree they've been virtually destroyed, but I do agree that the amount of the budget allocated to defense has been reduced, and I think that the population of Canada over the last 10 years felt that that was an appropriate thing to do. I did. I think now, at this point, that it requires review.
I think that people should know that our armed forces are not just the sort of toy show soldiers that people think about in terms of armies. Our armed forces are highly skilled specialists in areas like communications. And our government has been taking very strong measures to review ways to enhance that strength. We have a task force. Our Minister Alan McKinnon has set up a task force to study the issue of unification. You remember how the Liberal government unified all of the forces into one Canadian Armed Forces. That issue is being rethought, and a report on that will be out on March the 15th.
You mean de-unification?
Right, which a lot of people feel is a good deal.
A
lot of people in the armed forces canvassing.
I was also told the other day that of the 7 ships we have in Esquimalt, 3 or 4 of them might manage to get out the 200-mile limit without breaking down.
That's quite possible.
And that's that's if they can find crews who are appropriately bilingual to fill the vacancies which must be filled.
And of course the Tories are also committed to rebuilding the merchant marine, which gives us the capacity both in equipment and in trained manpower to enhance our armed forces.
I've never heard the N.D.P. policy. You wouldn't pull out of NATO and NORAD,
well, that is our policy, and let me tell you why.
Oh, chickens.
The caller is raising a very, well, I don't think it's chickens at all. The fact is that we want Canada to play a much more major role in world affairs. The caller is raising a very
Not the NORAD.
Well, not in
Not
those
in
kind
NATO.
of alliances, because what they do is wind up reflecting a foreign policy that isn't ours. But I think the caller, let me say again, the caller's raised a very valid point here. We're in a world situation where we have one power bloc, the Soviet Union, being totally irresponsible, being unreliable in the whole tone of what they are saying. Their actions don't meet or match their words. And Canada has to play a role in that. We have to be a neutral voice and a strong voice at an
One soldier in
international level.
uniform at chief headquarters, maybe? Just
Well,
one?
Well, I don't, you know, I think the issue is that Canada has to be...
I didn't know you wanted to pull out of everything.
No.
I must tackle Broadbent on that, but he's making me take a break. Webster after the break. Short and sharp, please go ahead. Carney, Johnson and Phillips.
Yes, good morning, group. I just want to say that I'm completely fed up with these presidential elections, and I'd like to know, you know, these representatives are as close to Ottawa as I'm going to get. How would they individually best represent me and my West Coast interests?
Well, we're not running a presidential election, so maybe you're voting in the wrong country.
Oh, we're not? I thought we were.
No.
Trudeau's running for president.
But I'll lead off on that and say that I expect
it's a
to
cheap
be...
shot, Art, but okay.
You just stole my time, so why don't you...
West, you do it. What are you going to do for the West?
What am I going to do for the West? Well, I'm going to represent a strong West in a time of confederation where I'm worried that the West is going to be under great pressure to give more than its share of its resources to other parts of Canada. We're going into a very difficult time in this country where there is resentment in Eastern Canada about the fact that so much economic power is shifting west. We have things like our Tory government's commitment to increasing trade in the Pacific Rim. We have other commitments which, in the energy field, which will strengthen the Western economy. We have to have a unified country, strong from coast to coast, and we can only do that with a Tory administration.
Let me just say to the caller that I'm glad that he's put this question, because most of the media attention is on the leaders, and it's unfortunate. You are also voting for a member of parliament to represent you in your riding. And I found in the last 7 months when I was representing Vancouver Centre that one of the most satisfying parts was looking after constituency inquiries. That's a very important part of a member's duties. Also, a member like myself, even in opposition, can put in private members' bills, for example, as I did, to give local autonomy to Vancouver's port. And this is part of a much bigger principle. I think we have to transfer a lot of the decision-making from Toronto and Montreal and Ottawa to the west, to our area. We're tired of being run long distance from back east, and that's one of the major objectives that I've been working on.
Well, I think that it's not so much a question of geographic representation as the representation that the riding has in terms of which people in the riding are being most effectively represented. And I would suggest that in Vancouver Centre, as in many other constituencies, what we have to do is look at the issues, and the caller is correct, we should strip away the leadership questions, I think, and look at the issues and see which group. If we want to represent the same old backroom power boys, then let's go for the old parties. If you want in Vancouver Centre someone to represent the ordinary people that live there, then I think you should vote N.D.P.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Webster, I just have two things to say, and then I'm going to hang up so I can hear it properly over the television. First of all, I have always been and will always be for the N.D.P. And another thing, I would like Pat Carney to clear up the, I don't know what it was on the Canada AM this morning, where Mr. Clark and Mr. Crosby had run into a conflict.
Oh, you're talking about bum to bum.
Right.
No, that was a remark by Mr. Trudeau.
That was also a remark by Mr. Crosby, bum to bum. It's a question on the implementation of oil.
Didn't they cut their wires crossed?
Okay, love, I don't think we'll bother going into that.
I think it's being explained by...
Okay, unless
Mr.
you want to
Crosby?
go into... Let's try another question.
No.
Something different.
Too much negative.
Pardon? Sydney.
Yes, Jack.
Yes.
That small businessman, 5'2", eyes are blue.
Oh, yeah, the wee fat fella.
I'd like to direct a question to Pat Carney.
Okay.
My enjoyed Crosby's approach to his budget, but I cannot understand why he planned an increase in government spending of 10% for each of the next 4 years.
Well, you can ask him that question tomorrow, because he's probably better able to explain it than I can.
That was the inflation factor, wasn't it?
Yes, his budget reduces, commits no new funding, no new government expenditures. But he does allow for an inflation factor, which is already built into the economy. You know, we are into shared cost programs. We're into programs like importing oil and subsidizing oil imports on the East Coast, which have to be paid for. So he has built in an inflation factor, which I think is realistic.
Art Phillips.
I'm glad the caller has asked this question, because one of the phoniest things about that budget was the claim that it was so tough. The budget, as the caller said, would have 10% each year increases in its spending, which is more than the last 2 years under the Liberal government. If you look at their own budget figures, they were less than 10% in each of the last 2 years. And one other thing, the budget keeps saying it's going to reduce the debt. On page 30 of the budget I'm reading from, the public debt charges are scheduled to go from $8.6 billion this year to $14 billion in just 4 years under the Crosby budget. So don't let them tell you that it was a great budget that's going to reduce our debt, reduce our interest charges. They were planning to increase the public debt charges from $8.6 billion to $14 billion in 4 years.
And you know the answer to that, Art. You don't have to be quite suspicious. You know perfectly well what happened to the debt in the country in the 11.5 years the Liberals were in. But is it not a fact that Crosby, for the first time in history, gave a 4-year forecast on where the economy, brutally put, was likely to go? Never before done.
I thought that was an excellent innovation, and I applauded it. I think that the Conservative budget is a very good one in terms of providing information for everybody to analyze.
Fall off your chair.
I'm always amazed at the Liberal flip-flops. You apparently defeated the budget or voted against the budget because it was too tough. Now you say on Jack Webster that it wasn't tough enough. When will
Of course, I didn't say that. What I did say, and I'll just correct it because it was misquoted. What I did say was we voted against the budget because of the 18-cent gasoline tax. And what I also said was the budget was misrepresented as being one that would greatly reduce the deficit. It doesn't. And greatly reduce the public debt charges. It doesn't.
It does reduce the deficit.
You know, one of the problems with the budget is that the rhetoric that goes with the budget makes a lot of sense, and people are willing to buy that, I think, to a large degree.
You know, one of the problems...
But the budget itself doesn't live up to that.
One of the problems with democracies is that they only work in wartime when we have dictatorships. Good line. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
It's the truth, too. Go ahead.
Good morning. This question is directed at Pat Carney. And it concerns Mr. Crosby's budget speech in the House of Commons. The one thing that I cannot understand is that every time the Tories get into power, and thank God they haven't been around for a long, long time, and I hope they won't be for a long time to come, is that they seem to tax the man in the street, the person that makes this country work. Why don't they tax the multinational corporations? That's my question.
The budget does tax the multinational corporations. And the budget helps the man in the street. As I've said on several occasions, the whole tax breaks in the budget, in the mortgage deductibility program and in the energy credit are there just to help you. You will pay, for instance, if you drive a car and you're paying the 18-cent gasoline tax, and if you get 18 miles to the gallon, in 1 year, your extra costs of the tax will be about $100, according to our figures. But the energy tax credit would reimburse up to $220 for a family of 4 over 2 years when it's phased in, which will more than offset the cost. But I'm hoping that you will save and reduce your gasoline consumption.
Well, we've estimated that the increases in gasoline and home heating fuel mean an increase of $1,000 over the 4 years for the average Canadian family. So that more than eats away the supposed compensation contained in the budget. But I think you know, the caller is making a point that that is very, very valid. You can talk about an increase, a surtax on corporations, but the fact is that what we need in this country is some overall tax reform and a tightening of the kind of deferment regulations and so on that exist.
I just want to cut through this. We all speak simplistically about this, and I accept most of the people is right. I agree with Ron that oil companies probably get away with murder one way or another. I agree with Pat that you've got to encourage them because they've got the expertise and the knowledge of they'll pick up their little rigs and go away. And if we have to cut our coat according to our cloth, we might as well have the Ayatollah Khomeini in charge because that's what he's going to do to Iran eventually. They're going to go down the tube. Where is the middle ground? Where is the easy understanding? Because you people were in charge for so many years, and all you left me with was the fact that 99% of our oil and gas industry is owned by foreigners except for this little bit of Petroca.
Jack, I think that's one of the things that the past Liberal governments did not do well, the Canadian ownership thing. And in the last 2 or 3 years, though, or since the formation of Petrocan, there's been a pretty significant improvement. The percentage of the industry held by Canadians has gone from about 5 to 20. But it obviously should be way more than 20, and I think that's got to be one of our major concentrations.
Take a break, and then we're going to finish with one last simple segment, in which we might even be quite serious. Okay. After break. Oh, no, please. I was going to be serious, but first of all, I got to be light. Flash your legs, Carney, will you please? Do a Margaret Trudeau.
Okay, there you are.
What's the reason for the mucklocks?
Well, after this show, I'm going to go out to the airport to meet John Crosby, who, of course, is famous for wearing mucklocks. He wore them on budget night. So I thought I'd wear my Northwest Territories mucklocks from the Hanny Butte.
Well, you give him a plug on it, and you've got to put him incommunicado and not allow him to speak to anyone from the media until he appears here tomorrow morning.
I would never.
Is that a deal?
I can't promise.
Okay. And you're going to bring in Mr. Trudeau tomorrow while Crosby's here.
Well, we'll all try and not make any promises on those things.
Why is Trudeau not doing any open line shows, any television?
I think he feels that at this time he'd like to just gradually over the next 2 or 3 weeks lay out the specific Liberal campaign, which he started to do, with things like the $35 a month increase for the guaranteed income supplement, which is the most important program that the Liberals are going to put forward in this election. And I think he'd prefer to do it in that orderly fashion.
Let me just say something about that $35. You know, that is, with all the fanfare, is made to sound fantastic, and I think it's a sham, really. When you consider that with that $35 increase, a pensioner in Vancouver is still $90 below the poverty line. It's a bit of a farce. And
it only goes to those who are on the guaranteed income supplement.
That's right. It's a guaranteed income supplement, and it's still, if you're drawing that, you're $90 below the poverty.
Just while we're talking about leaders, was my breath all right this morning?
Well, I think so.
Nothing noticeable. Twice in the last campaign, I had to do Broadbent out of the studio because of his schedule. I don't think Broadbent wants to appear and talk to people on this show either. Maybe it's
well,
me.
I don't know.
Would you ask him for me?
I certainly will. I'd be happy to.
I mean, we're not going to get Trudeau. We're going to get Clark, and we want Broadbent.
We had Broadbent into our riding for our nomination meeting because Broadbent is a big plus for the N.D.P.
Surely he wants to talk to 150,000 people all around British Columbia.
Via satellite.
Via satellite and other places where they don't even vote, don't even have votes in the election.
Well, I don't see.
Would you act as my agent?
Sure, I most certainly would.
I mean, I'm giving up on Trudeau. I'm not even going to try.
Okay, well, I'll see what I can do.
In fact, they've got nobody they can send. Andrus isn't running anymore. There's nobody who's going to come out to speak for the Liberals on the West Coast at all. You'll have to come back, Art. Perish the thought.
Okay.
No,
Glad
but
to.
who is it? Who's coming out to do the big shot for the Libs?
Oh, there'll be a number of Monique Bégin, Jean Chrétien, people like that.
Oh, Chrétien's good, yeah. He didn't want to defeat the government. Bégin didn't want to defeat the government. I'm quoting Richard Gwynne, of course. What about Lalonde? Will he be coming out?
I don't think so, but he might. I hadn't heard any plans for him to come out.
Of course.
Is there anybody else in the Liberal?
Well, no, I don't know. But Prime Minister Clark is coming out Sunday. Crosby, of course, is here today. Flora MacDonald's coming out. Don MacDonald is coming out. They're all coming to Vancouver Centre.
Oh, we're getting Jean-Luc Pepin on the 28th of January.
Don MacDonald's a Liberal, Pat.
I'm sorry, David MacDonald.
David MacDonald. You mean the wee minister from PEI?
Darn many MacDonalds around.
Nice wee fellow.
The cute minister from...
Well, I think the biggest danger you ladies and gentlemen face is gross, not indecency, disinterest.
No, I don't find that. Can I speak to that?
It's not on the doorstep at all.
Yeah, let's have it.
Maybe because you're getting tired and run down after your short Christmas break. But I find on the doorstep that... Well, someone has to keep you in line, Jack. I find on the doorstep that people realize that we are into a new decade and we are into a new era, and that there is a new realism, and there is actually a sense of relief that we have a government who's facing up to some of these problems and bringing in measures that deal with them. And when you talk about...
You're getting quite skilled at this double talk.
No,
I was asking about the response of average voters.
I find they're all going to vote.
You?
Yeah, I find the same thing. There's relief, all right, but it's relief that the government's out and we've got...
Have you door-knocked at all?
Sure. I think I've been out at the bus stops every morning, and I think at first there was resentment about having an election at the holiday season, etc. And now I think people are very glad that we're having an election. In fact, there have been some surveys that suggest that that's the case.
And we are all signing up people for the voters list. I urge you, because the enumeration was not very well done in Centre, do check that you're on the voters list and phone your party headquarters.
Okay, look, I've got to just say one thing about that, because the Tories in Vancouver Centre have been on and on and on about the enumeration and after the returning officer. And I think it's about time that something was said publicly. I've been around a long time and in a lot of campaigns, and the enumeration is no worse in Vancouver Centre than it is anywhere. There are always problems, and if you come to any one of the party offices, we'll see that you get on the list. But let's have enough of this baloney that the enumeration is so terrible in Vancouver Centre.
Well, all of the voters who couldn't vote last time will know what a phony statement that is.
Okay, look at the camera and smile nicely.
Okay, anything for you, Jack.
Look at that camera and snicker. I thank my guests for being so patient with me. It's just one of those things. I cannot dance in the streets because of this election. I shall do my conscientious level best to bring you sane and sober issues. But thank God Crosby's going to be here tomorrow, after the break. You know, it's quite funny. I was in the dentist's office yesterday afternoon, and now I can't find the piece of paper I was looking for. I was in the dentist's office yesterday afternoon, and I picked up a Maclean's magazine of just a year ago. And I'm not a great one for keeping files. You know, we keep clippings, and we do what we have to do to be up to date. And the incredible change in image in people is unbelievable. Just a year ago, in February, my friend Fotheringham, and he is my friend up to a point, I suppose, was writing this of the Liberal cabinet then in power. He said, he was knocking Otto Lang, whom Fotheringham hated politically, and he said, this particular statement of Otto Lang's is worthy of a government which is remarkable for its cabinet, which is full of dolts, dunderheads, no-hopers, and never-will-be's, as their arrogance flows on as water runs downhill. The Liberals, wrote Fotheringham a year ago, are suffering from mental drip. And, you know, that's what the Liberals were at the end of their office, suffering from mental drip. And then in the same issue of Maclean's magazine was an article by my friend Tommy Hopkins, who properly reflected the state of provincial affairs at that particular time. This was when Bill Bennett had actually faced down and demolished Ian Sinclair of the Canadian Pacific Investments on the effort to make a corporate snatch, as they say here, of BC's huge forest company, Macmillan Bloedel. And at that particular time, Bill Bennett's star was very high, certainly in Hopkins' eye, and I remember it myself too. They were asking questions and answering yes. Will the high school graduate with a hardware store background make it in the steamy BC legislature? Yes. Will Bill Bennett hold the party together? Yes. Will he emerge from the shadow of his father, W.A.C. Bennett, for 20 years Premier of the province? And finally, will Bill find a heart? Just a matter of interest. This was when BC was not for sale, as it still is, I presume. But Bennett's image a year ago was shining, tough, good, and clean. And we look at it now and we wonder what the devil's going on in Victoria. Just an interesting aside. We are so ephemeral, mercurial in the media that we go on attack and we really forget what happened yesterday. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Now, what else? I strongly hope that Mr. Trudeau does make some media appearances here, but I doubt if he will. And I agree with Dalton Camp that Mr. Trudeau has willingly accepted a muzzle put on his head by Senator Keith Davey, who is presumably the arch conspirator in planning the Liberals' tactical approach, and that they are relying entirely on this election in the belief that people are so disenchanted with Joe that they would rather have the failed Prime Minister who said he was quitting, who said he was going to live in Montreal, who said he was going to make way for somebody else. They would rather drag him back as a pro-interim leader of the party and keep his mouth shut than expose him to the public. I think I was saying the other day, I've always been nervous about interviewing Trudeau. He is the toughest guy I've ever interviewed anytime, anywhere in all my life. But this time round, I think he would say, well, good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Is it really you? Have you come back from the political dead? Is it the second coming? Did you double-cross Donald MacDonald? Were you kept isolated from Andrus? Did you realize you were going to defeat the Tory government? Did you really want to put us into a midwinter election? Is it not a fact that Crosby's budget, full of holes though it may be, and full of hypocrisy as it is in some places, especially the handouts to the middle class on the mortgage deductibility, is it not a fact that it was for the first time in Canada's recent history a step in the right direction of a somewhat punitive budget which may make Canadians realize that it's a cold, hard world out there in which we have to compete to survive. I don't know if I'd get away with it. He'd probably trample over me, but I'd sure like to have a bash at it. Free for all between now and the end, after the break. Okay, I don't want to talk politics. I'm damned if I'm going to talk politics. And I'm going to be honest with you. I went home yesterday afternoon. I lied to my doctor and said I'd stopped smoking completely. To one of my doctors. The other doctor, I said, I've smoked a few. I had 2 cigarettes last night. I've had 3 menthol cigarettes this morning. I think I am reasonably calm about the whole business. I may go out and do something really drastic, because those of you, you've seen many drug addicts on this program, and over the years I've interviewed every conceivable kind of drug addict except my own kind of drug addict. I am going to win this battle against cigarettes, and then I'll drop dead of a heart attack, not lung cancer. Touch wood. My wife will say, touch wood, take it back, touch wood, take it back. Okay, I'll touch wood and take it back. But I just did a chat with Art Phillips just now too about perhaps the possibility of getting Trudeau on the air before the end of the campaign. Quite fascinating. Is it official about Clark yet? Can we talk about that on the air? Tomorrow morning we're going to have John Crosbie, the Minister of Finance. Monday morning we're going to have Prime Minister Joe Clark. We will get broadband. I'm quite sure about broadband. I was just jabbing Johnson on that. One of the real problems that I have ahead in balancing my election coverage, which we must do fairly, we don't have to give each party precisely the same amount of time. Oh, and by the way, if Jack Phillips, the Communist candidate in Vancouver Centre, is watching this morning, quite prepared to give you a 10-minute segment, Jack, anytime you want. He and I used to be antagonists in the olden days a long while ago. It's going to be very difficult to get Liberals to balance the heavy weights of the Tory party. And I'm just telling the Liberal people who are watching right now, don't cry and scream that we didn't do it fairly. We'll do it as fairly as we can, subject to your cooperation with high-caliber people whom we can use to balance against the Crosbys and the Clarks. The only one in sight at the moment is, what's his name? Jean-Luc Pépin, who is a delightful Liberal, as you know. One of the issues which has not been discussed and probably won't be discussed in detail in this campaign at all is the question of Claude Ryan's, what's his word, his own kind of commission on the new Canada. I find most of it acceptable, but we haven't had a chance really to discuss it yet, because what Ryan envisages is a weaker central federal government. He'll probably find it easier to negotiate with Clark than with Trudeau. I don't think the question of Quebec is going to be a major issue in this campaign at all. I think the sadness of it is that it is an election for the President of Canada without any real examination of the issues or the problems of the country. How's that? Didn't even take a phone call because I don't want to talk politics. I want to talk politics. I don't want you to talk politics this morning.